You have Patrick Findaro here, co-founder at Vetted Biz. Excited to bring on Joe Mathews, who's the founder and CEO of Franchise Performance Group. Joe's worked with over 140 franchise brands over the past few decades. Joe, thanks so much for joining today.
I appreciate the invite. I appreciate what you do, bringing transparent information into the marketplace.
No, thanks. Yeah, we try our best, and I guess a big thing is get the information out there and let the prospective franchisee decide. So you've been in franchise development. You've worn a lot of hats in franchising, but I would say your expertise is really on the developing of brands
Most of
and
my
getting them.
career has been spent on the development side of franchising, almost 40 years now.
And you started at basically the largest franchise system ever to be created, right?
Well, it wasn't the largest at the time. It was 350 units, and it'd been around 20 years. 350 units, and they were rounding out their franchise development team. They just brought in the second guy, and then I was the third guy for Subway. Yeah, there was 40 people in the whole office. I could throw a pencil and hit Fred DeLuca in the back of the head. Not that I did, or not that I would, but I could have. Yeah.
It must have been wild just to see that growth as well as that energy in an
Well,
organization.
21 years, I was an art major, right? So what the hell did I know, right? I was a crap artist. I got hurried up. I got my marketing degree because I was paying for my own college or half of it. Couldn't afford another year, right? And then I just ran the Subway with, because I read an article in the newspaper. Back in the time, Patrick, they used to have a thing called newspapers. And they were making they were talking about how they want to be bigger than Subway. And I said, well, they must mean theoretical marketing help. And because I'm a theoretical marketer, because I had no real world experience. And I went down there, they hired me the same day and threw a pile of leads at me day one. And just kind of blowing and going. I didn't know what I was doing. So I didn't know really what I was seeing, right? I mean, it took 20 years for Subway to get to 400 units, which is about when I intersected them. And then we opened 1,000 units a year for the next, we set them on pace, but almost 40-year run of 40,000 units.
But isn't that common with other franchise brands or companies like even Starbucks, where it's like, I don't know, they've been around 40 years, but there was that period where it just kind of shot up, and Jersey Mike's, which doesn't have as many locations as Subway, but they're in the top five out of thousands of brands in terms of net unit growth, and they've been around nearly 50 years.
Yeah, I wrote a book on that for the franchisors called The Franchise Tipping Point. And it's usually, I mean, there's only less than 10% of the brands get to 100 units or 100 franchisees in a 10-year run. Usually, it's a 20-year run to get to about 100 units, but somewhere between 40 and 100 somethings, territories, units, all of a sudden, the market tells you have proof of concept. And then that cautious money starts coming in hard and fast. And then everything gets easier, everything gets more efficient. There's chains that kind of do it faster now. Especially I think with private equity pouring in. I think private equity's done a pretty good job of professionalizing franchising because if you don't mind me saying, I know you
No,
haven't
please.
asked the question yet, and I'm running, but I'll run with this next one. So one of the issues with franchising is that franchising, the community of brands, have never done for the franchisor, which franchisors do for franchisees, which is codify a model, right? There's no such thing as a franchisor model. Like, show it to me. It doesn't exist.
It's an
There's
eye of the
nothing written
beholder.
down.
It's
There's no
whoever.
book. No. So every franchisor on some levels winging it, right? Now, private equity is coming in hard and fast, as you know. They're picking up on that on the level they're picking up, and they're professionalizing it. So they're codifying elements of the franchisor model, making it more scalable quicker and making it more efficient. And they're putting the resources in. Most franchisors operate like they're MacGyver, right? At 1,500 units, like, they want to do it bubble gum, paper clips, and shoestring, as opposed to, hey, look, it takes, a couple $1 million worth of investment and reinvestment to make a successful franchisor. That's just what it takes.
One thing I've seen that's like a bit concerning from my end is where you have a successful business has been open like 30 years, it gets acquired or the founder, signs up to open up, the second location, but also the next 100 locations just based on the financials from that whatever cleaning business that has incredible financials, but is basically being marketed to prospective franchisees that, hey, these are the financials. You make $800,000 in EBITDA, but little does a prospective franchisee know, it took 20 years to get to that number.
And they haven't replicated it, right?
Yeah.
I like to, when somebody's ever asking me like what's it take, my wife and I are both in franchising, right? I'm a 60-year-old newlywed, and I married somebody from within the industry. Franchising has given me everything, including my wife, right? So yeah, but you're at a cocktail party or whatever, and somebody finds out you're in franchising. Patrick, what's the next question they always ask? What's hot and what's new, right?
Or
You know,
what should I do? And I
yeah,
usually 9 times out of 10, I say, it seems like you're kind of already on your right career track and continue on. But there's some times where it's like, yeah, you really should consider franchising.
yeah, but not hot or new. Like what you want is something with proof of concept, right? Hot or new. How I hear that is it's not proven, it's not scalable, or it hasn't endured any market cycles, and all I hear is risk. So when somebody says, "Well, what should I do?" I say plumbing or something like that. Something that's really survived the test of time, right? Something that's not going to be replaced by technology, something that's scalable, something. I like cottage industries with no 800-pound gorillas, right? Like I feel like I wouldn't want to open a coffee business. Sorry, I don't like competing against Dunkin' Donuts and Starbucks. I'd rather. I think there's easier way to make money. For instance, no, not crapping on the coffee business. There's people making money in the coffee business. Just they're not. That's just not where I'm going to put money.
For sure. And at what stage does it make sense to start franchising your business? Where, from what I understand, like you can have a very nice lifestyle in most areas of the US with like 3 to 5 locations of some replicable brand and just stop there, or start franchising potentially after that. But at what stage does it make sense to consider franchising, and how many units are you going to have for it to sustain and make financial sense for you as an entrepreneur?
It's surprising to me how many entrepreneurs don't do the math or don't know what the math is and don't know what the available market looks like, right? They just jump in assuming they're going to increase the available market just by the simple fact that they're there, right? So, but to answer your question, that I would like to see at least a 10-year track record within the current business model. I like to see at least 3 to 5 territories or locations that they plan on replicating, right? So sometimes brands will call me and say, "Well, we're going to franchise our model. Yeah, we're going to do this express concept, but they got 5 full sit down restaurants." I said, "Well, then you don't have any experience in the business you're replicating, right? You're creating a model around your failures, right? And then you don't want to reinvest any more money, but it's okay for the new guy to come in and risk his dollars, right?" I call that the low road to franchising, right? I do think franchising has a strategic advantage and a place in the marketplace, right? I don't know, I'm an American exceptionalist. I love the United States of America. I think we live in the greatest country ever. And I think what makes us the greatest country is because other than potentially Israel, we're the most entrepreneurial country in the world, right? We make stuff happen. That's what we do, right? We don't like the English, we chuck them out, right? We don't want to pay taxes, not be represented by gone. Yeah. We did it with a third of us, or a third of the population. We've got a deep entrepreneurial self-sufficiency, do-it-yourself embedded in the culture of what it is to be an American, and people love that, and I love that about us. So I think that rugged individualism, right, really drives entrepreneurship. Why wouldn't you want that in your small business, right? Why wouldn't you want rugged individualism? And how can't that rugged individual, why wouldn't it make it better, right? So I think injecting entrepreneurship into the business is a strategic competitive advantage, especially over chains. It makes a lot of sense to me. But second would be, a lot of times the franchisors, they don't always do it thinking through it, right? Like I'll ask a franchisor, might be new. We charge 6% of royalties. Well, if a franchisee runs your model, what kind of EBIT are they getting? Well, 12 points. Okay. Here's how I hear that: $1 for me, $2 for you, and I get paid first, right? I said, so what are you doing to capture 33% of their EBITDA, right? Yeah. What are you doing? That makes you a partner. Yeah. Well, that's for our name. Not good enough, right? So it's like The only way you can get established in the marketplace as an entrepreneur is, it's Econ 101, right? You got to deliver more value than you charge in price. That's the recipe for sustainable business. How many franchisors are delivering more value, okay, than they're charging in royalties?
Well, it's a good question.
That's the conundrum, right?
Yeah.
The ones that are successful are now some franchisees, obviously, especially have been around for a while. I think as a franchisee's been out there 20 years, it's harder to deliver value because they have.
I think there's also a life cycle. Like I have a client that invested in a real estate property management franchise. In the first 3 years, he got a ton of value, but I don't think he'll renew the contract as it comes around because he's already built all the relationships.
But
He
that's the learning
doesn't
curve,
he
right?
doesn't need the franchise brand. So I think there's kind of a life cycle, I guess, depending on the type of business. Where if the franchisor is not like continuing innovated and helping with lead generation and all these other activities, whether it's marketing, sales, product, etc., like
Exactly. Yeah.
you're not as relevant, and that's going to have a disgruntled franchisee, even if he was happy in the first couple of
Well,
years.
I mean, if you really think about the franchise model, who pays the most in royalties? It's the successful franchisees, right? Okay. Who gets most of the time, money, and energy? Would be the less successful franchisees, right?
Early stage
Yeah, so you
training,
got the
putting
you
them up.
got the early stage, right? So you've got the top guys in a constant cycle of subsidizing the bottom, right? And that's the model. They don't often get paid attention to. The smarter brands do, like Great Clips, for instance. They were so smart. I don't know what the number is today, but I spoke at one of their conferences for large multi-unit franchisees, and their model was the model changes. I think if I remember, it was 23 units. Like 23 units, you take entrepreneurship out of the model, and you're building an self-sustaining organization, right? And you're going to have the CMO and you're going to have the VP of training. So they had their own separate support structure. They had their own separate conferences and their own separate everything, their own separate model. Now that for me, now are you delivering value? My answer is absolutely, right?
I've spoken to franchisees that are pretty disgruntled with their franchisor, but point blank, I would say, is it better you going independent? And more times than not, they say no.
Right.
And to give an example, especially these like large service type businesses, like restoration services, after disaster, medical home care, medical
Right.
testing, they're able to get a lot more revenue because of those national
National account.
contracts and relationships where even if they're dealing with stuff that they don't want to deal with and there's disagreements with the franchisor, it's still better for them to wear that brand. And if they didn't, the revenue would be halved.
Well, that's right. I mean, it's all run on insurance contracts, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, same thing with like employment agencies, like Express Personnel runs the entire back end, right? And does employee funding, right? They fund payroll, right? So it's like that's brilliant. Well,
That you're earning your keep.
yeah, exactly.
Where like what's the alternative? You have some small staffing agency and you're paying like 18% per annum with invoice factoring and
Yeah,
there's delays of
exactly.
payment and
Yeah, but to your point, Patrick, is I think one of your questions that you sent me in advance, and I like riffing, so we're good. But it's like like what drives franchising, right? And I do think for me, one of the big breakthroughs I had in business is when I started studying philosophy, and because I want to think how I think. Right. I had a boss, a guy who taught me franchising back 30 years ago, still one of my best friends. He used to say, watch how you define the problem because that's how you're crafting the solution. So he used to spend an intense amount of time identifying problems and making sure he's thinking about it the right way. So he got me thinking about how I think. And I think there's a default setting, and people don't really examine how they think about franchising, especially at the top. So some people, franchisors, think it's my brand, my system, my customers, right? My process, etc. And then, well, where does if it's all my, even my customer, right? Well, where does that leave the franchisee? Well, that's a sharecropper model, right? Yeah, that already failed, So, and that really jams the franchisee into some lowly state and really doesn't, in my opinion, value what they're bringing to the table or the risk, that they're taking in the particular brand. I mean, I think starting a business is heroic. It's hard. hard to do business in the United States, but it's worthy. Then there's franchisors that look at it differently. And, so I would subscribe to the philosophy that the franchisor exists, okay, to make successful franchisees. And the franchisee exists to add more value to the customer than the extracted price, right? So, and then I would say the brand is bigger than all of them. So Patrick, I tell you, I was an art major, right? And one of the differences with artists than are with business guys are almost always reductionists, right? How do you look at the problem, break it down to its core components, and then solve the core and build up, and you solve the problem? So they look at brand the same way. Artists don't do that. So artists would say the brand is separate and distinct. So example would be, you can't take the Sistine Chapel and say, you know what the Sistine Chapel is? It's nothing more than the sum total of all the brushstrokes that Michelangelo did, right? Now, the whole is grander and different than all the sum of the parts. And you can't define the whole, okay, as a sum total of all the individual parts. I see franchising the same way. I say you can't define the brand if it's done right by the sum of the parts, right? That there's some synergistic explosion that occurs where it becomes bigger and grander and different than the sum of the parts. I use Harley Davidson as an example, right? When that company started, I think it was in Milwaukee, right? They're building motorcycles. Yeah. Then the customers started building relationships with Harley Davidson on their own terms, right? And next thing you know, it's this live free lifestyle brand that I don't think that the founders could have ever anticipated.
We're seeing that too with Black Rifle Coffee. That's kind
Black
of
Rifle Coffee cracks me up.
franchising.
Yeah.
But that's like a new brand that kind of came out of nowhere. But like the content they produce is everyone I've asked that's a veteran or is currently active service, they all smile when I mention it. Oh yeah, I remember, or we used to drink that in Afghanistan. They all have some personal story with that brand.
Yeah, and it ties into something other than coffee, right?
Definitely.
So the brand is bigger than coffee. Yeah, but good point.
And then, there's only so many prospective franchisees, right? And I think you were one of the first people to be very vocal and right on this, that there's a lot of brands selling, but there's not so many people buying, because a lot of successful franchisees are the ones that are opening new units, and they've kind of already committed to our brand.
There's not a lot of primary data, right, on franchising, right? So I think at the heyday, and I don't think we're back to pre-COVID business starts. I think we're close. But the largest year I remember would have been 2019. I think the number was 31,000 new franchise starts. That would include existing franchisees expanding. So I got together with Daryl Johnson from Frandata, and I just kind of asked him, I said, what's the data on just new franchisees buying new businesses? And he would say he didn't know. I said, well, every brand I've ever been with of any size, right, more than 50% of development would be existing franchisees expanding. And he said, yeah, he said that would be consistent with
so say 15,000 prospective buyers.
That puts us at about 15,000 new franchisees a year, right?
And there's like, what, 2,500 franchise brands?
Oh, more than that.
Recruiting?
Princeton, one of the equity firms, said that they've been able to source in the United States over 7,000 brands.
We see, Vetted Biz, we have 7,000 as well.
I don't know if there's 7,000 active.
I think like probably 25, 3K tops are like producing FDDs and are like.
Well, I think there's 4,000 FDDs, Patrick. You may know that more than me, but I've heard there's 4,000 active FDDs right now. I don't know. So
let's say 4,000 and there's only 15,000 buyers.
Yeah. And if it takes 40 to 100 units to get the royalty self-sufficiency, how'd you like to own a business with a 20 to 40, 50 year break even, right? That's where we are. Like there's the crazy supply and demand disequilibrium. And then we've got another 250 to 350 new franchisors coming out every year. When I started franchising, there were about 2,000 franchisors when I was with Subway in 85. And if we've got 250 to 350 new brands coming out as franchisors every year, and then we're saying there's 2,500, my number might be 4,000, that's a turnstile, isn't it? Right? So one's coming in, one's coming out. There's obviously not enough to sustain the majority of the franchisors. I mean, we probably got the market demand, number of buyers, maybe to sustain maybe 1,000 brands, but we've got 4,000.
So unless you get viral, like say Crumble Cookies, where it was just like basically organic growth on the franchise development side. I guess this is where a group like Franchise Performance Group comes in, FPG, where you can really help them sell and distinguish and get them through all the noise to those
I
prospective
even
franchise.
hate the word sell because I bet Crumble didn't have the experience of selling anything.
Yeah, what word do you use?
Oh, I mean, for me, it starts with unit level economics, right? If you're
Yeah,
a good investment, the market's already looking for you.
yeah.
So we're working with a company right
Yeah, buy,
now.
sell. More, I think I don't like buying or selling like it's a car. It is an investment.
Yeah, so I look at it as I would say my role is recruiting, right? I would
Recruiting. I like that.
say I'm in the business of talent acquisition on behalf
Yeah.
of the franchisor, right? So we weaponize the CEO and help the CEOs realize the vision of the brand by bringing in good franchisee talent. And I'm big on fit, and I respect the franchise candidates' money and I respect their time. And if they should be doing something else with that money or time, or there's something that's a better or bigger, higher, best use of their money and talents, that's where they should go. So I'm not afraid of losing a deal because if it's a good brand and a good investment, the next guy's coming, right?
Yes.
So I'm
And
working
if
with a
it's not a
company.
good brand or good investment, you probably don't want to be recruiting for them.
Yeah, I mean, I like working with good brands, and sometimes good brands become bad brands pretty fast too. Like there's always life cycles and gates you got to go through. But we're working with a company, I'll name names, Pliables, right? So it's a
Oh
$350,000
yeah.
investment, and they do $1.2 million in sales. Get no
And there's a lot of
inventory, simple.
franchises. There's a lot of franchises in that space that do like 500K, 600K in sales at the same investment amount.
And there's no cooking. There's little food prep, and I mean, it's just it's a great business model, and the community loves it. And they've got great products. We came in to help them on the Fran Dev side. In a month, we typically, like in a normal concept, on an FTE level, full time equivalent, we'll bring in maybe 4 to 8 qualified applicants a month to keep a steady state pipeline of maybe 15 to 25 buyer ready qualified franchisees in the pipe. You can hopefully get 1 or 2 deals a month across the finish line, right? That's the typical FPG client. Within 60 days, we have 80 applications and 1 FTE. I mean, it's just I hate to use the term, but fish jumping in the boat. But when you have a really good brand and you've got great unilevel economics and it's survived the test
And
of
it's a
time and you got a
lifestyle.
smart
It's a
leadership team.
cool thing to be doing, you know?
Yeah,
There's a
and
lot.
it's yeah, and, you're promoting active and healthy lifestyles, and people are better off if they eat acai. It's mostly it's largely power bowls and that kind of thing. The all the super fruits, right, is kind of what they do, and they work. It's like rocket fuel. And you feel better and you look better, and it just appeals to the investor, appeals to the passion player, and this is going to be they're going to get to 800 to 1,000 units over the next few years unless they do something they shouldn't be doing.
Are there any other brands that are worth mentioning for you, like over the last 5, 10 years that you've seen firsthand their growth and maybe what led to that growth?
I like things that took a lot of thought. There's a brand that just got bought out, I think, by Princeton called Packouts, 800 Packouts.
Oh yeah.
So this is kind of a brand within a brand within a brand. So they work with the insurance restoration companies, right?
Hmm.
And they take over the piece. They take the furniture and everything out of the smoke or flood damage, right? Document everything where it's supposed to be. They take it out, they dry it out, they restore it, and then they move it back in. So when the homeowner, gets to move into their house, when it's completely restored exactly the way it was. They do, the clothes. They'll fold up the clothes and put it back in a drawer, but they take the smoke damage out. They take the mold out. They take out of the fabrics, right? So it's all textiles and stuff. Yeah, who thinks of that?
Yeah.
So
That's
so I get
pretty.
this call from the founders. The guy was a youth pastor, and the other guy was a pastor, right? And then they invent this concept. They would come out of the restoration business, and I go to like literally East Bumfudge hills of Georgia, the northwest hills of Georgia, and
Hmm.
and then I come across this thing. They have this amazing training center, this campus, and they've got these little houses built into this warehouse, and they flood it and they do the stuff. The trade people. I mean, the level of genius and thought that was put into this model, and nobody knew who it was. Then they showed me the numbers. I said, this thing's going to be freaking huge.
Huh.
Huge. And now it's blowing up. And it's all blowing up with existing franchisees from the space because you almost have to come from the restoration industry to know the amount of genius that was put into this model. And they're good guys, right? They're just genuinely nice human beings that you want to do business with, right? So great model, unbelievable niche. They own the niche. Now the copycats are coming out like they always do, right? So, but franchising, what are we, right? We don't invent anything typically. We invent the hamburger or the sandwich or fitness. We're just a better, faster, cheaper model, right? We see what the other guys did and we try to enhance it or rip it off. So now the copycats are coming out and they may do well too because it's a very valuable niche and necessary to the customer, right?
It seems like saying it one step ahead for the end customer and franchisees. And it does seem like the landscape's evolving quite a lot. And 2023 was a difficult year for a lot of these businesses with labor, you name the issue. And I know you're a prolific author, multiple books. What do franchisors need to really be keeping in mind 2024 and beyond?
Well, at the end of the day, it's I see franchising from the franchisor's perspective. I see it as just a two-metric business. Number one is franchisee profitability. So they just have to be consumed with franchisees making a good return on time, money, and energy. Right?
What's the easiest way to measure that? Because I had a call with a franchisee of a cell phone repair, hundreds of locations, and he said half his fellow franchisees don't even have a P&L. So I imagine the franchisor is not obviously providing them systems, but how can franchisors really help these people to understand the numbers and make sure they're getting a good?
Well, first by collecting them, right? Then I get asked the franchisor. Let's just use your example. My first question to the franchisor is, "What business do you think you're in?"
Yeah.
Right. He would probably tell me he's in the cell phone business, right? And my answer is going to be, I think that's the wrong answer.
You're a licensor and marketer.
Well, I would
right?
say they're in the business of recruiting, training, developing, and leading a team of entrepreneurs to build a brand.
I like that. That's a good.
Right.
That's a good.
If you believe that's what a franchisor is, what's missing from that definition is the product or service, right?
Yeah.
Recruiting, training, developing, and leading a team of entrepreneurs to build the brand. Well, you can't do that if you don't have the data. If you believe the franchisor exists to drive franchisee profitability, you can't drive franchisee profitability because you don't know what it is, right?
Any systems or software that you would recommend franchisors consider to collect that information?
I'm not a big SaaS guy. I see the value of it. I'm like the last guy you want to talk to about tech.
Right,
I was the guy that my VCR was flash at midnight for about 20 years, right? So I'm that guy. But Frame Connect is a pretty good journeyman platform that does everything pretty well to drive a franchisor. I think franchisors, for me, standard charts of accounts are a necessity, right? So and then it's your typical bookkeeping system, and there's bookkeeping services going out standardizing charts of accounts specifically for franchisees, so franchisors can compile better data, right? As long as there's standard charts of accounts and you're on, everybody's reasonably measuring the same things the same way, it's much easier to scrape and compile the data. We've never lived in a better place where we can get big data and crunch the numbers and get real meaningful, information about ours and everybody.
And I know it depends on the franchisee and the industry, but what should franchisors aim for in terms of profitability for their franchisees?
I don't, unless you can make it up on volume. My minimum number would be 15% EBITDA because there's no resiliency below that. And that's why the food guys, they're dipping. 15 was pretty standard in franchise. I kind of cut my teeth on food. Those were the first few concepts I grew up in. But, we always had 15%, 18% EBITDA. Now food is 10 to 12. Now Crumble's I don't know, but I suspect Crumble's higher than that, which is why
it's higher, but I've heard it's dipping quite a bit. I mean, there was definitely a cookie craze and people are a little more mindful about what they're spending.
Well, that's another thing what franchisors do, right? It wasn't Crumble Bakery, it was Crumble Cookies, right? Yeah. So what do you do if people stop eating cookies and start eating something else, right? We saw this we don't learn a lot in franchising. So the cupcakes, right? Gigi's cupcakes, this cupcake, that cupcake. Yeah, they had a good run until people didn't want to eat cupcakes anymore. When you tie your brand to a particular product
Could
and
have
you
just
tie
been
your brand,
Gigi's, and then they could have hit the cookie wave.
they could have done anything, right?
Yeah.
So as long as it's sweet and eat nine out of the house, it's consistent. You know, one of the yeah, I had a nice little run with Menchie's frozen, but it was just called Menchie's, right? And we took them on a 25 units and built it to 500 in about 7 years. You know, that was one of our big wins. And we sat down with the CEO. He called me up and he said, you know, I want you to grow this chain. I said, no. He said, why? I said, because it's frozen yogurt. I lived this in the 80s. It's just you just haven't been around long.
What's it like?
This guy was in his 30s. I
Yo-yos
said,
that
you're
it
not. Yeah,
just
you're
comes
too young to
around?
know how this is going to
Yeah.
end, right? Yeah, it's going to end nasty and awful. And he said, no. He said, here's what I'm going to do different. I'm going to ride. We're just going to build a frozen dessert brand called Menchie's. We're going to ride, okay, the self-serve frozen yogurt craze to build distribution, okay? But we're not going to promote frozen yogurt, and we're going to pivot when customer demands change,
Okay.
okay? But by then we'll have built distribution and we can do anything. And I said, that's smart. That will work. So we built that. And then when it came time to pivot, he froze. And Unilevel Economics went from $750,000, which we were marketing, to $375,000. Except they were doing it with 7 Taylor machines when McDonald's has 1, right? He killed the golden goose because he froze. He didn't execute. And, you know, so that for me, you asked me something like what changed. I was too naive to understand how much leadership has to do with brand success. I think I overemphasized the value that franchisees can bring to the table and underemphasized the damage poor leadership can bring to an entire brand.
Yeah, I mean, the most successful franchise brands that I've witnessed, you talk to their franchisees and they were successful before they entered the brand. And then it was like united with the other franchisees
Yeah.
and the CEO at the brand level, they're able to kind of bring everyone further along. But they already had some level of success and they're adding a lot of value to the system. They're not just leeching off the franchise brand.
Yeah, you know, one of the real good leaders in franchise, I think, is Paul Brown. Yeah, so from I guess it's inspired. Started out with Rourke and whatever that kind of focus brands. I guess he's over multiple brands now. But when I met Paul, we were hired by Paul to do the franchise opportunity website for Arby's.
Oh,
And it
cool.
was when Arby's was Where's the Meats, right? So Paul was the CEO for about a year or so at Arby's, and he took it right down to the studs. He said, what you know, because Arby's at the time was a real tired brand, right? And he said, what do we actually do better than everybody else? And at the end of the day, he decided there wasn't a whole lot they could do, but he said, but we could be the largest sandwich chain with drive-throughs. So he said, everybody else is operating at a 1,200 square foot footprint. We have an opportunity with the drive-through.
And
So
the
he
French
brought it
dip's
right
pretty
down
damn
to
good.
I'm sorry?
And the French dip is pretty damn good.
Well, but that all came later,
Yeah.
right? It came down to we're going to, because remember, Arby's used to do chicken. They used to do
Yeah.
hamburgers sometimes. They did this, that, the other thing. So he
So
stripped it all the
drive-through
way down.
sandwiches.
Drive-through sandwiches,
Nice.
where's the meat, right? And they just rebuilt the entire brand on that. And, you know, we articulated that from a franchise investment. I put together, I don't know, 40, 50 page, website articulating the vision of Paul. And then he brought in that, I thought it was a genius level VP of marketing, who's now the CEO of Papa John's. He was the genius behind the social media marketing of Arby's, right? So Arby's was the first kind of cheeky viral social media with the Farrell's hat and all that stuff, right? Things that they did, and the guy from the Daily Show, they had that running war with Jon Stewart from the Daily Show, getting millions of dollars worth of
Huge. Free PR.
free PR, yeah. So but those they're just great leaders and they shine, and they just deliver. And now they're delivering for other brands too. Why? Because they're great leaders who get it, right? And I think there's not enough of those in franchising.
I want to, I guess, close it with a question. Like for prospective franchisees, what should you be looking for in that leader of the franchise brand that you might be signing an agreement with for the next 10 years?
Great question. So if I would get FaceTime with the leader, make sure you get FaceTime. I would ask them, what do they think of franchisees? What's franchisees' role? Second, I would check into the franchise system and say, for franchisees heard, and do they have a seat at the table? And does their franchisees' advice get implemented? Right? Or are they just some token advisory service that they listen to sometimes and sometimes not? And then I would get the corporate cultural insight too, right? I'd look at the existing leadership team, right? So if they're not experienced, there's a huge demand of experienced leaders. So if a franchise CEO can harness a good team of experienced leaders and keep them, they're doing something right. I'd look for either inexperienced leadership underneath the CEO. That means he's a tyrant, or if he's turning over his leadership team, it means my way or the highway, which is not how to run. Might be how to run a chain, right? But it's not how to run a franchise brand. So corporate culture and franchisee franchisor relationships would ultimately be the test of that. It would be the test there.
Well, Joe, this has been awesome. What's the best way for franchisors to get in contact with you if they're looking to basically grow their brand or whatever life cycle, potentially have your services to help them out?
Yeah, so I would say they can just visit our website, franchiseperformancegroup.com. We've got a good resource page there for franchisors. We've hundreds of articles and 4 or 5 books they can download that are free for franchisors. So we like that we give our IP out for free, so franchisors can go there, see how we think, how we would do business. Read like our deliverables are a sum total of what's on our website.
Perfect, Joe. We'll be sure to include that in the link to the description and want to thank
Thanks,
you for your
Patrick.
time.
All right, you have a great day.
Appreciate it.